Hello, Mrs. Reef here. Today we're going to be continuing our writing techniques lessons and focusing on citing our sources. Before we get started with the strategy itself, let's take a look at why we do this. The big idea that I want you to be able to understand is that when using facts from a source, we have to tell where the facts come from. We mostly do that so that the reader gets the extra info they need. For example, the reader should know where your information comes from. Your reader wants to know what types of sources you used. They want to know if they can trust your facts, if those facts can be believed. They want to know they came from a reputable or trustworthy source. And then also, we want to make sure that the writer or researcher of the articles that you used gets credit for their work. So all of this stuff, explaining where it comes from, showing that our sources are reputable, all of these things we call citing your sources. So whenever you hear that term, cite your sources, they really just mean tell me where you got your information from. So now we're ready to start talking about techniques for citing our sources, and there are three main ways to do it. The first way that you're going to start learning is by telling the source number after you tell your fact. So first you tell your fact, and then you put the source number in parentheses after the fact. The second way to cite your source is by including it as part of the fact sentence. So instead of putting it in parentheses at the end, you tell where it came from in the sentence itself. For this one, the fact came from Ocean Conservancy International. And then the third way is by directly quoting whoever said it, and then giving that person credit for their words. We call it a direct quote because we're going to write their exact words in quotation marks, and then we're going to explain who it was that said those. So these are the three main ways. As you progress through school, you'll learn other more specific ways to cite your sources, and there are different requirements depending on what you're doing, what kind of paper you're writing, and you'll learn those as needed for different aspects of your educational career. So let's start by looking at the first one and going through the steps more in depth. So here's the first strategy. This strategy is called after the fact using parentheses. So I'm going to first tell my fact, and then I'm going to tell the source using parentheses. And it has three simple steps. Step one is you're going to write the fact in your own words. Step two, after the fact, you're going to put the source number, or you can put the title, in parentheses at the end of the fact. And then step three is just to end that sentence with punctuation. So let's look at some examples. Over here, I have sort of an example of a paragraph planner. I have the topic sentence I want to teach, and I have my three key details that I've pulled from my sources. So let's look at how we would write those different key details and cite the sources. The first key detail that I want to teach is that polar bears have hollow fur in order to trap air. So first, I'm going to write that fact in my own words. You can't see it without a magnifying glass, but polar bear fur is actually hollow. So there I wrote the fact in my own words. Next, I'm going to put a parentheses and write the source number, and I recorded that this is from source 1. Source 1. And then you can see I've already put my end punctuation. Let's do another example with key detail number 2. Key detail number 2 is about how polar bears have black skin, and that helps absorb heat from the sun. So I'm going to put it in my own words. Another adaptation that they rely on is the fact that their skin is black because the color black absorbs heat from the sun better than other colors. So I took this idea and wrote it in my own words. Then I'm going to put the source number at the end and end it with punctuation. All right, and then this third one is about how they have a layer of fat under their skin, so I'm going to write it in my own words. Finally, underneath their skin is a layer of fat that acts like a blanket to help them hold in their heat. Then I'm going to come over here and put the source number or title underneath. And this one came from source 2, and again, end with punctuation. So these are how I could take each of my key details and write them and cite the sources at the end using parentheses. Now let's take a look at what that would look like in a sentence or in a paragraph. So here's that same paragraph where I've got my key details in it with my sources cited. I started with my topic sentence and then I've got key details. I'm going to go through and color code topic sentence, key detail, and elaboration so you can see what those look like in this paragraph. One way that polar bears are able to survive in the Arctic is because of unique adaptations that allow them to stay warm in the freezing cold temperatures. There's my topic sentence. You can't see it without a magnifying glass, but polar bear fur is actually hollow. Source 1. So there's the source being cited for that key detail. This hollow fur traps air heated by the polar bear's body close to it, which keeps the cold air away from them. That's my reasoning. Second piece of evidence. Here we go. Another adaptation that they rely on is the fact that their skin is black, because the color black absorbs heat from the sun better than other colors. Source 1. Now this paragraph doesn't have a piece of elaboration after that one because it's a longer key detail. So I'm going to launch into my third key detail. Finally, underneath their skin is a layer of fat that acts like a blanket to help them hold in their heat. Source 2. These adaptations all work together to help the polar bear survive in brutally cold conditions. So when you look at this, you can see each of the key details has a source cited at the end of it. Here's a source, here's a source, and here's a source. This is what's required to be on grade level at the 5th grade level. Now I want to show you 2 other strategies that you'll sometimes see and that you can start trying out in your writing. Here's the next strategy. Another way that you can cite your sources is by including it as part of your fact sentence. To do this, you're going to start by using a transition phrase that introduces the source. And I'll show you some examples because I know that might be new. Then you're going to write the source in your own words, just like we did in the last strategy. And again, end our sentence with punctuation, just like the last strategy. We're going to use the exact same paragraph planner that we used before, but this time we're going to cite our sources using this secondary strategy. So again, let's start with this first key detail about the fur being hollow in order to trap air. So first, I'm going to look at my key detail 1, fur is hollow to trap air. And instead of starting with the fact, I'm going to start by using a transition phrase that introduces my source. So source 1 was actually a National Geographic magazine article. And so I'm going to start by telling what was said in that article and telling that that article is where my info came from. So here's how I'm going to start. According to Sari Firth of National Geographic magazine, so that's using that transition phrase, this word here, according to, is sort of my transition phrase. It's telling me who is saying it. And then I have the name of the author and where the source came from. So this is all my lead-in. Now I'm going to write the fact in my own words. Polar bear fur is actually hollow. And then you can see I've already ended with punctuation. So step 1 is my transition phrase and introduce where my fact came from. Step 2 is to put the fact in your own words. And then step 3 is to end with punctuation. Let's look at another one. The next one still comes from source 1, which was where the author Sally Firth was writing for National Geographic magazine. And this one is about how they have black skin to absorb heat from the sun. So I'm going to start with a new transition phrase so it's not the same phrase over and over. Here I've got the name of the person, Sari Firth. And since it's her again, I'm going to say further explains. That's my new transitional phrase. And then I'm going to put the fact in my own words. Then another adaptation that they rely on is the fact that their skin is black because the color black absorbs heat from the sun better than other colors. And then that last one, I actually wrote it down as a quote because I really liked it. But I'm going to talk about how they have a layer of fat under their skin. And this one has a different author. It came from source 2, which was an article by the Ocean Conservatory International. And the author was Dr. Helene Chow. So I'm going to start by using that transition phrase. And so I've got finally, and my other phrase I'm going to use is teaches. I'm saying what they're doing. And then here's where it came from, Ocean Conservancy International. For this one, you might have noticed I didn't say the name of the person. I just told what the source was. That's allowed too. And then I'm going to put the fact in my own words and end with punctuation. Polar bears have a layer of fat underneath their skin which works like a blanket to help keep them warm. So for these ones, and I'm going to highlight this in yellow to make it really clear, instead of writing source 1 and source 2, I'm citing my source right here. This one I told people came from Sally Firth of National Geographic magazine. Here I'm telling them it's Sally Firth again, and here I'm telling them the source was Ocean Conservancy International. So this is a second way that you can cite your sources. Instead of just telling the source number, you can give your reader more information about it inside your fact sentence. So now here is that paragraph using this second citing your sources strategies. If you'd like, you're welcome to pause and read it, but I'm not going to do so now because it's pretty much the same paragraph you heard earlier, just with a different strategy. However, instead of writing source 1, source 2, this one uses phrases like, according to Sari Firth of National Geographic magazine, Sari Firth further explains, and Ocean Conservancy International teaches. These are the ways that I've cited my sources in this paragraph. And here is the last strategy that I'm teaching today. This one is called direct quote. So for this one, we're going to literally write exactly what the author wrote. Let me put that in a better color. And we're going to put quotation marks around it. So instead of putting it in our own words, we're going to tell the reader, I'm literally copying what the author said or what the expert said. But I want to caution you. Direct quote can be powerful when you are quoting somebody who's really important. So when you're quoting an expert, or when you're quoting somebody who lived through an experience, or when you're quoting somebody who has a lot of information, it can be tempting to quote a bunch because then you don't have to put it in your own words. But the end result means that your writing isn't really your writing. You're just telling people exactly what other people said. So I'm going to teach you how to do direct quote, but then we're going to look at why we don't want to use it all the time. All right, so to do direct quote, first you start the sentence by introducing the person you're quoting and explain why they're important. So if I just said Sari Firth, you're left wondering, why does Sari Firth get quoted? What's so important about her? I need to tell the reader who she is and why she's important. So I'm going to introduce her. Then I'm going to use a dialogue tag. Dialogue tag is when you tell us stated, explained, teaches, when you've got that verb. And then you're going to put their exact words in quotation marks and end with punctuation. So let's look at an example yet again. Let's start with that same key detail number 1 about how their fur is hollow. So I'm going to start by introducing Sari Firth and who she is in this situation. So I've got Sari Firth, an author for National Geographic magazine. So I'm telling you who she is. She's not a scientist. She didn't go live with polar bears and study them. She's an author. So she did research and she's sharing that research with us. Next, I'm going to use a dialogue tag. That's the verb telling me what she's doing. And so I'm going to use the word states. She's stating this information. And now I'm going to copy her words exactly. Here, where I've got my key detail, I did not copy her words exactly. So I went back into the text and I wrote them down exactly the way she wrote them in her article. Here's what she wrote. Many people don't realize it, but polar bear fur is hollow. So I introduced her, I explained who she is in relationship to what I'm writing, I have a dialogue tag, and then I have her statement. Let's look at the next one about the skin color absorbing heat. I'm going to start by introducing her. I told the reader it's Sari. I don't need to retell who she is because I already did. And here's my dialogue tag. This time instead of saying states, I'm using the word explains. And then here was her exact quote. Polar bears have black skin even though they look like they're white, and this black skin is better at absorbing solar heat than light-colored skin would be. So those were her exact words. Again, she's an author, not a scientist. This last key detail, I actually wrote the exact quote because when I was taking my notes, I really liked the way she said it, and She's a doctor of zoology. So she's a scientist who works with animals. And so her words felt really powerful. Watch how I introduce Dr. Helene Chow. Oh, actually, this one I remember I did backwards. This one, I decided to go backwards. I put her words first, and then I'm going to explain who said it and use her dialogue tag. So these were her exact words. The reason they can endure these brutal temperatures is because they are basically wearing a blanket of fat underneath their skin. I thought her words were really powerful. I wanted to keep them that way. And then I introduce, here's my dialogue tag, explains Dr. Helene Chow. So I'm telling who said it. But then my reader is like, who's Helene Chow? Why should we listen to her? I need to explain why she's important. So I put a zoologist from Ocean Conservancy International. So for this one, you can see I can mix up the order. The other ones, I really tried to keep them in order to make it simpler. But for this one, you're allowed to change up the order. And then let's look at a paragraph here that has exact quotes. For this one, instead of doing source 1, source 2, source 3, I have here Sari Firth, an author for National Geographic magazine states. That's how I'm citing that source. And then I have Sari also explains. I'm citing the second key detail from her. And then my third citing my source is right here with my dialogue tag and my explanation. Explains Dr. Helene Chow, a zoologist from Ocean Conservancy International. Now, this might sound like a great way to go. I said earlier, you get to use other people's words and you don't have to put it in your own words. And sometimes they can say it fancier than we can. However, take a look at this. This is that same paragraph, and I highlighted blue anytime I was just copying someone else's words. When I look at this paragraph, I realize half of it isn't even my writing. Half of it is just me copying other people. And that's the danger of direct quotes. So when I look at this, I have to think, who in this paragraph did I really want to hear their words because they're an expert and what they had to say was so clever? And who told me good stuff, but I need to put that in my own words. So when I think about that, I really think that Dr. Helene Chow, because she's a zoologist, this one felt really powerful to do a direct quote. Right? She's a scientist who works with these animals. The other examples, it felt lazy. I should have written those in my own words. So a good rule of thumb is to only have one direct quote per paragraph as you're learning. Eventually, as you get into high school, you're going to start learning when to use them and when not to for different situations. But a good strategy for late elementary and through middle school is try just one direct quote per paragraph. That way, most of the writing is truly your own words. All right, so now you've learned these 3 strategies, and almost everyone is left asking, so which strategy is best? Which one should I be using? And the honest answer is the one that works best for you right now. There's no one answer for everybody. Here's what I mean. If citing sources is very hard for you, if this is new and you're still trying to figure it out, use the first strategy, the one where you write the fact in your own word, and then at the end put parentheses, source 1, end parentheses, and punctuation. If citing sources is a challenge, that's a great place to start. If it's getting easier, if you're like, I already know how to do that, try a newer strategy. Maybe try the one where you include the source as part of your fact. That was the second strategy I taught. And if you have a really great quote from an expert and you really want to share it exactly the way it is, try a direct quote. If you thought that expert said something so powerful, I want my reader to hear it their way, try a direct quote. And if you are a solid writer who's looking for ways to level up and be more advanced, the end goal is to try a combination of strategies that best fits your writing in that moment. So on this last slide, I'm going to show you this same paragraph we've looked at this whole time, but I'm going to use all 3 strategies. And I really want you to see how powerful it is when you get to see all 3 strategies being used for whatever works best in that moment. Let's check it out. One way that polar bears are able to survive in the Arctic is because of unique adaptations that allow them to stay warm in the freezing cold temperatures. You can't see it without a magnifying glass, but polar bear fur is actually hollow. Source 1. That's citing my source the first time. This hollow fur traps air heated by the polar bear's body close to it, which keeps the cold air away from them. Sorry Firth from National Geographic magazine further explains, there's citing my source the next time, that another adaptation that they rely on is the fact that their skin is black because the color black absorbs heat from the sun better than other colors. Finally, the reason they can endure these brutal temperatures is because they are basically wearing a blanket of fat underneath their skin, explains Dr. Helene Chow, a zoologist from the Ocean Conservancy International. So there's my third way of citing my source. These adaptations all work together to help the polar bear survive in brutally cold conditions. So if you are looking for what does level 4 citing your sources look like, this is what I'm looking for. Feel free to pause and go back and rewatch any section you need, or check your notes as a refresher on the things we just learned. Thanks for joining me.